possibly film a video without earrings? Hi guys, so I'm here today to talk about the authors I need to read. So as opposed to a specific book's TBR, there is a list of authors that I have, and I don't mean my 100 women authors list, although some of these people are on that list. But these are authors that for various reasons I have always felt like I want to / need to read, like personally. And they are authors who, there isn't a specific book that I'm really keen on. There's not this one book where I think I must read that book. It's about the author and it's about their backlog of work, and they're all authors that have written multiple books and just have this aura about them or that I want to sample and discover for myself. A few of them are recommendations from my dad, which isn't surprising because they're like authors that he loved, so I too want to experience them. So I thought it might be fun to do a TBR video, which is the authors I want to read. I do have some books by those authors, so the likelihood is I might read those first, but I'd love to hear your recommendations if you've read those authors, if you have favourite books by them, because some of them I have all of their books because they were my dad's favourites and he has all of their books. So I would love to hear your thoughts if you've read any of these authors, and maybe you can push me to finally read some of their work. So without further ado, I'm going to get into the authors I need to read. So I've already mentioned my dad, so it seems apt to start with an author that was one of his favourites, and that is José Saramago. Now José Saramago is a Portuguese author and he wrote a plethora of work, so many books, all of which my dad owns, so I have a copy of every single one and could easily start anywhere. This is one of his books that I have brought to London with me because I was tempted to start with this one. It's a standalone novel which follows an elephant that has been given as a gift from one kingdom to another, and we're following this elephant on its journey to its new home. That is why it's called The Elephant's Journey. The back says that it is an enchanting mix of fact, fable and fantasy, and peppered with witty reflections on human failings and achievements. It is, in the end, about the journey of life itself. Now José Saramago is an incredibly famous author. His prose is highly respected, and I completely trust that, as pretty much everyone I've ever heard speak about him, even here on BookTube, has had positive things to say about his books, and I want to experience that for myself. So although I do have this one on my shelf, I go back to Edinburgh regularly, so let me know what your favourite José Saramago book is. More recently, however, you'll have seen on my channel that I did a video all about my favourite pieces of Scottish literature and my favourite Scottish authors. One author that did not make it onto that list that you might have been surprised not to see was James Kelman. James Kelman is a pretty famous contemporary Scottish author of the past few decades, and his work is very famous for being a really honest look at working class life in Scotland, and again, he was one of my dad's favourites, and my mum likes him too. Yeah, I have never read him, and there are many of his books sitting on the shelves in Edinburgh that I could pick from. So he is an author I really want to try for so many reasons, because he is beloved by my parents, because he depicts working class Scottish life, and I grew up in a working class Scottish household. He again just has so much praise surrounding him as an author, but I honestly don't know where to start. He has written so many books and I don't know which one to pick up first, so if you have read any James Kelman, I would love your recommendations. An author I'm pretty sure I know where I'm going to start with though is Alexandra Kollontai. This is a great love, and this is my mum's copy. My mum loves Alexandra Kollontai. She read Alexandra Kollontai's books when she was in her 20s, the same age as me, and they kind of stayed with her, and ever since then she's been telling me to read them. And particularly this book, which is both about a young woman's relationship with a young man, kind of how much she loves him, but also the imbalance in the relationship, and about political activism and seeing herself as a political activist separate from him, whereas he might be on the right side of so many arguments in terms of social justice. He's not necessarily treating her very well. It says, Kollontai writes of age-old problems, emotional dependency, the need to love, the desire to live one's own life. but she also confronts other deeper questions, rarely examined with such honesty. This edition actually has 2 other short stories in it on similar themes, that's why the back is a little bit vaguer, but I'm not sure if you can get this edition anymore. I'll see what I can find online. It's originally published by Virago and it's my mum's copy. I believe Alexandra Kollontai was a Russian author and she was writing in the early 1900s. An author I have discovered my interest in purely through my own research online, however, is Octavia E. Butler. So Octavia E. Butler is an author I first heard about because of BookTube, I think perhaps Elizabeth from Books and Pieces, and she is pretty well known for being one of the first ever Black female authors to be published in the science fiction genre, and this is probably one of her most famous books, and that's Kindred. This is a time travel novel about a woman who is sent back in time to when slavery was still at its height in the USA, and she is a black woman and she has to save the life of this young white man over the years because otherwise her family won't come to be. It sounds really interesting, and thankfully this one is actually a feminist orchestra read for this year. It's our November-December read for the book club, so I will definitely be getting around to some Octavia E. Butler this year, but she is definitely on my list of authors I've always meant to check out, so I had to mention her here. I also really want to get around to some Ursula K Le Guin. Now, the one thing about this author is I've actually read half of one of her books before. So I read about half of The Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K Le Guin a few years ago. My dad loved that book and he was always recommended it to me, and I tried, but I maybe just wasn't the right age or just not in the right headspace, and I could not get into it and ended up leaving it behind. Although it's a book that now I think that I've been reading more fantasy, I would like to go back to and try again because it is loved by so many and I just want to give it a second chance. But again, I've got loads of her books available to me. The Left Hand of Darkness is another one that really intrigues me, which is a science fiction novel that plays with gender. This book, Lavinia, which is set just after the Trojan War in antiquity and follows the princess Lavinia and her relationship with the Trojan hero Aeneas. So I have plenty to pick from, and it's just about committing and finally reading some Ursula K Le Guin. Another female author that I really want to get to is Naomi Mackintosh. So I actually have 2 of her books here, although I have another one on my dad's shelves. So this is the one that I've already tried to read, and I tried to read it last year, and you know, life just was not in the right place. It was just got left to the wayside, but it's a book I really want to go back to because I was enjoying it. And this is The Corn King and the Spring Queen. Naomi Mackintosh was a 20th century Scottish writer, so again, hopefully she'll make it onto future Scottish literature recommendations videos. And this one is a book set in antiquity but about a fictionalised people that Naomi Mackintosh created, and these people also have magic. Some of the women in their community are witches, but they do meet up with real people of antiquity like the Spartans, so it's a really masterfully constructed world. And like I said, I did actually read almost 100 pages of this one. It's just huge and I didn't get a chance to keep going, so I want to go back to it. But I do also have to hand Memoirs of a Space Woman, which is a much shorter book about a woman's adventures in space and her relationship with different aliens. So I might go for this one first just because it's so short, and hopefully it'll give me the taste for Naomi Mackintosh. But how could I forget, on the topic of Scottish literature, Liz Lochhead. Liz Lochhead is a Scottish playwright, and she's written so many plays, but I own 2 of them, one of which is Medea and the other of which is her Thebans, and both of which are retellings of Greek myths. Yes, a famous Scottish playwright who retold Greek myths, and I haven't read her. What is going on? And they're so short, I have no excuse. So this is an author I really need to get around to. Another author I'd really like to read is Sarah Waters. So Sarah Waters is best known for writing historical LGBT fiction involving romances between 2 women. And she's written, again, a plethora of novels, and I actually have one on my Kindle, I think, The Night Watch perhaps. However, I am open to your recommendations. I remember she has another book called Fingersmith, and there's definitely more. She's quite a prolific author, and all of her books are constantly being praised here on BookTube and off. I hear amazing things about them, and I love the idea of historical lesbian romance novels. I'm totally up for that. They're literary fiction, so I imagine they're incredibly well written and constructed, and I would just love to try some of her work. So if you could tell me your favourite, then that might push me to finally pick her up. In terms of a non-fiction author that I wanted to mention, I really want to get around to some Judith Butler. So Judith Butler is probably most well known for her book Gender Troubles, which explores gender and how gender is a performance and how it affects our everyday lives and how it's constructed in society, and we kind of are forced to play up to that, and it restricts us. But I've never read it. I've read little bits, extracts of it, but I've never actually read it. And I do own this book by her, which is Frames of War, When Life is Grievable, and this is a book all about the politics of war. However, when I have gone to read this before, it has been quite dense and academic, so I think I need to be in the right headspace. It's not easy reading non-fiction that you can just pick up casually and go la 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 la, because that's what I do when I read books apparently. It's going to require a lot of concentration and thought, I believe. However, I really want to get around to reading something by this author because she writes so much non-fiction on the topics that I'm interested in, and she's just quite famous, especially for her book Gender Troubles, that I would like to have read some of that in full and be able to, you know, have my own opinion on it. I would also at some point like to get around to some Günter Grass. Günter Grass is a German author, again from the 20th century, and one of my dad's favourites. The Tin Drum was one of my dad's favourite books, and he was always trying to get me to read it, and it was another one where I kept picking it up and getting to about page 50. I don't think I never managed to get past page 100, I can promise you that. Despite every time I picked it up, I thought it was really well written and really interesting. I think part of it's the edition that he had. It's one of those really tiny text dense editions, and I just found it really difficult to read. I don't know what my excuse is, but it just never came to me the right time, and I would still like to read it because I know he loved it so much and thought it was such a well-written piece of literature that I want to experience that for myself and just generally read some Günter Grass, although I probably will start with the Tin Drum, unless you can recommend to me a much shorter book by him that will help me ease in, because I know again that my dad owned all of his books, so let me know. But I think the Tin Drum is one of his most famous and well respected, and it's one I would like to try. It's about our character Oscar, who's narrating the story now from a mental hospital in the 1950s, and he grew up during World War II. And his life, and it's just quite odd. Like, there's some really odd things happened in that first bit that I read to do with people hiding under skirts, and it's just a little bit eccentric, but it is quite reflective, I think, of my dad's favourite books. It's kind of what he liked, well written, literary, slightly surreal novels, and I would like to read this one. And lastly, I briefly thought I'd mention these two authors that I have little math market paperback fantasy books by, and that is Anne McCaffrey and Robin McKinley. Now, these are just two fantasy author names that come up again and again and again when you look for fantasy recommendations. They go alongside the others that you might expect to see there, like Robin Hobb, and they're so highly praised and recommended if you're into fantasy that I would like to have tried them for myself. This Dragonflight is the first in Anne McCaffrey's Dragons of Pern series, and if you look for dragon book recommendations, this will always be in there. It will be in the top 10 wherever you go. This series is just one of the dragon series out there, and I haven't read it as a dragon lover, which I find slightly appalling, so I'd like to give this a shot. And this just happens to be the book I picked up by Robin McKinley, which is again the first in a series, and it's called The Blue Sword. Again, it seems to fit in with a lot of the typical fantasy tropes. It's set in a high fantasy, medieval resembling world full of magic. We've got characters whose life isn't necessarily going as planned, and they kind of have to get involved in saving their lives and the lives of others as things are feeling the upheaval in the magical world that they live in. Could describe any fantasy book, couldn't it? But I have faith because everyone recommends Robin McKinley so highly. Now, those aren't the only authors in the world that I want to read, but these are authors that I have perhaps wanted to read for quite a few years and have multiple books, all of which I'd be happy to read as opposed to one specific book, although because I own one specific book by some of them, those are probably the ones I'm going to start with. But I would love to hear your thoughts if you have read any of these authors. Do you actually think they're a little bit overhyped, or do you love them as much as everybody else does, and do you have a favourite book by them? I'd also love to know the authors that you feel you need to read. For whatever reason, they've just been on your list as authors that one day you need to check out and form your own opinion on. Let me know. Until next time, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye!